Wendy and Ardell, lovely to see you this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Vested, I mean, BP is probably now kind of cited as one of the major examples of where Vested's worked. Wendy, particularly from you, you've obviously got a long background, well-known background in the city. Why did you look at the Vested model, may I ask?
So I joined BP in November 2019, and they were in the middle of actually the first time of a global outsourcing deal for facilities management. But they had outsourcing deals previously. I'd done a number of different models, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. And we were looking to say, okay, what can we do that is different? Because none of them work brilliantly. So what is it that actually is coming through, what's come through as new? And actually my old commercial manager said, have you looked at Vested? Suggest you have a look at this. This might actually be what you need. So I started engaging on that. I spoke to Kate at the University of Tennessee, and it was just like, okay, well, if we're going to try something different, we'll try doing something different and see whether or not it will work. And it really tied into our values as an organisation. And that was the thing to get the internal stakeholders on board with it. So they really aligned behind that. And probably the easiest sell I've had internally to do.
I was going to say, how difficult was that to get people behind it?
So we were very, very aligned in terms of outsourcing, but we knew we needed something different. The fact that it was this a strategic collaborative relationship built on behavioural science, that actually was sort of the piece that was of massive interest. So yeah, it was. I can remember having quite a difficult conversation in Budapest actually around it. Where I think I was being grilled for about 2 hours on my feet, relatively new still to the organisation, thinking what is going on. But they came out and actually having had some really good challenge, actually wanting to do it, which was great. So.
Before we came on, Wendy mentioned that you two have known each other for a long period of time. Does that help the process? The fact you two probably could have honest conversations.
Undoubtedly so. So, behind the scenes, often Wendy and I would sort of course correct some of the things that were going on with the core team, or ask each other, what did that actually mean? What did you understand by that? So undoubtedly having that relationship made a massive difference to us. And I think to Wendy, because it was a safe place where we could ask those questions and get honest answers, really. So really it helped hugely.
And for Wendy, it is quite a risk doing this because it's brand new, wasn't it? Because a lot of the people in the UK are just adjusting to this now, aren't they? Or beginning to understand it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's got a reasonable amount of press. I think a lot of people look at it, and certainly, and I put myself in the same category. You look at Vested and you go, oh, yeah, that's really straightforward. That's really easy. Yeah, I don't need to do the courses. I don't need to read about it. It's actually, well, yeah, that's obvious. And we found that in the bid process that the companies who were bidding actually had very different interpretations of it. And if you're going to do it, you actually need to embrace it all. And it's actually complicated because some of it is intuitive, but some of it is also challenging the way you've behaved and the way you've thought and the way you have acted and worked with your supply chain over a period of years. So it's really ingrained behaviour that you're all of a sudden having to change and challenge. And certainly the Vested process that we went from start to finish, I mean, I can remember saying to Ernst & Young, who are one of our advisors, Incendium, who are our advisors, and also Kate, can't we just do this quicker? And I mean, Ardell and I were sitting there going, is it really got to take us 5 months? Oh, it's like, are we really, can we not just run these things in parallel? And it was, no, you had to go through from A to B to C to D, because it all builds up into the pricing model and actually the outcome, and you are co-creating a contract. And that is, at the end of it, you're sitting there going, I've got a contract, actually. And, there's no arm wrestling. There was no sort of really big arguments about it because it all just naturally sort of fell into place. It was quite weird. I
Refreshing.
think I actually said that at one point to Dell on the phone, which is a bit weird, this.
But it sort of happens without you realizing it. When you enter into it, you know it's a complicated process, because as I might have mentioned before, we did our vested CDA training in parallel with negotiating the deal. So we used the deal to test the logic of what we were learning. So we were doing this all along. But as Wendy says, by the time you got to pricing, you had built 80% of the solution that was going to be contracted in the governance section in Rule 5. So, and when I started, I didn't see that. It only sort of dawned on me as we got through, and it was like, well, thank heavens it did, because it's a great way of doing it. A great way of doing it.
I mean, what Wendy was saying is true, isn't it? Because critics of vested say this is common sense. We don't need all the training. But what you're saying is you do need it, because you need to understand the depth of things. Is that right?
I think you do need it, and well, what's common sense? You know, a buyer's common sense to a seller's common sense are often different common senses, aren't they? You know, at least here you get your differences out at day one. You know, you get them out, you agree your guardrails, you agree your guiding principles, you agree the outcomes, the joint outcomes, what you desire to achieve. I don't ever see that happening in a normal transactional contract, even if it is pretty common sense. You know, it isn't. It's one way. This is not one way. This is two way, right from the get-go.
And Wendy, what was your greatest surprise and learning during the process? May I ask?
Oh, I'll have to think about that. I think actually it was, for me, I mean, I've done a fair number of outsourced contracts, and we mobilised it in a very short period of time. So from signing the contract to actually going live, we had 4 months. We had COVID, so the whole thing was also done virtually. So that was a bit weird, suddenly meeting people face to face who you'd spent hours with on video calls, and suddenly realising, oh, you're not just in 2 dimensions, this is what you look like in 3. It was post go live, how collaborative the relationship has been and how aligned. So, I mean, Dave Bembo, who's my global account director, we've not had any of those typical bumps in the road that you have after you go live, where it's, you know, you didn't tell us about that, or we found this, or this. It's actually been incredibly smooth, and it feels already like a relationship that's been going on for a long time.
That's good.
So it was the impact post go live that has really surprised me pleasantly, because it's been very, very easy. I'm not saying it's not, it's still a business relationship at the end of the day, but it's certainly already we can start seeing the transformation, and we're working together across the 2 teams in order to really transform the service delivery. That's very quick. Yeah, normally by now you'd be arguing about the budgets, and we're not having that conversation.
That's good to hear. I think for me, I suppose the biggest surprise was Wendy just touched on there. We managed to do all of this like this, i.e. virtually. It was incredible, because the depth and the detail that was gone into on call after call, day after day by the wider team, it was an enormous lift. And to think that was all done and has resulted in our clients saying, well, actually, it feels like you've been here a long time, when, well, we were there, but we weren't there. We were virtual. That's good to hear. But that was the surprise to me, that we could, and actually a surprise that's a good one, because we can build on that you can do this, right? You can do this in a much more accessible and remote way that's much more immediate. Things happen quicker on the trot. Whereas, you know, in the old way, it was book a meeting, fly to Timbuktu, meet the client, come back, process it. You know, this was instant. And I suppose the surprise was that we were able to navigate through that new way of working in a COVID environment and get the positive outcome that Wendy's just highlighted.
I think that if you looked at the makeup of the people on the call, we had huge calls. I mean, there were 20, 30, 40, I think 50 people sometimes on these calls. What it allowed was people from remote locations sometimes to be able to dial in to make sure that their voice was being heard and that they understood it. I would never have been able to have afforded to fly those people across the world in order to do that for what was effectively 5 months. So it was far more efficient to do it all virtually. And we did wonder whether or not we could actually do it, but it actually worked better virtually than it would have done in person. I have to say, I would do that again online.
Me too.
That's really interesting
really
because the great view has always been that you can't build relationships with Zoom, but you're saying obviously you have.
Yeah, you can. The other thing which there is that it also meant that some of the more junior members of the team as well could participate in what would have been discussions normally held at a far more senior level. And, you know, you would have been doing it with a much smaller, tighter group, and they could actually witness, they could learn, they could actually do a number of the team did their CDA training as part of it, as Ardell said. So they came out qualified as well as certified deal architects. And we probably wouldn't have done that if we'd been doing it in person.
Well, what's your greatest learning from this?
Oh, probably try something, you know, be prepared to try something new. And even on something as, you know, you've got these tried and tested ways of outsourcing, you know, transactional contracts, you've got guaranteed maximum price, you've got fixed price. Actually have a look at what is failing and actually how you can do it. I mean, I was thinking about it earlier today. If you look at a traditional model, yeah, my job is to reduce my costs and improve my service. So I don't want to pay, I want to pay less money and I want more for it. And Ardell's job would be to maximize the return to his organization. Those would look, in a traditional model, that is what we do day in, day out. And then we wonder why it fails. Because all of a sudden we're beating the supplier up because of their margin. And the first thing we go after is their margin. So they're making less money. So they're not actually presenting a good front internally. So therefore they try and spend more money in order to make more money, which is the opposite of what you want to do. And yet we have perpetuated that myth for years.
Yeah.
And when you talk about it in that way, it just doesn't make sense. But it's taken quite a long time and a lot of very smart people. And, you know, I think there's an alternative way of doing it. You actually have to say, okay, if I want to have great service and I want to have a great cost profile, I need to have a company that is going to be innovative and do things in a different way. And I'm prepared to pay them to do that and not have it almost as sort of demonized that you pay your supplier a fair price for what they're doing for you.
Ardell?
I mean, just building on that, you know, knowing that there are clients out there that are prepared to go down this route. I think I said it to you before, Chris, it's changed the way we're approaching our business generally. We as JLL want to do more relationship contracting. In fact, we are pivoting to really only consider that. Now, no, I'm not saying everyone's going to go full V vested, right? But there are some clients that, let's call it small V vested or are more aligned to a partnership model. Those are the relationships we are interested in, the relationships that we can build and last a long time with. That doesn't mean to say we're going to say no to every transactional contract that comes through the door, but we're going to be hugely more selective in which ones we go for because they are punitive. They lead us into situations that put our firm at risk, and we can't work with that, and we shouldn't work with that. So the key learning for me is that there are clients that are open to this. There is a middle ground where both organizations can win. We have win-win. And why wouldn't that be a way of contracting in the future? Why shouldn't it be a way? But it's trust, and it's dropping your guard, and it's being prepared to, to bear all, really, and to not be afraid to do so at the risk that you might lose something, which never happens when, as Wendy says, when someone's got a different driver from, the buyer's driver is different from the seller's driver. Here it's much more in the middle, and so the key learning for me and now for JLL is we want to do more and more in this space. Bring it on.
I suppose that's the question. Do we think there's a kind of change in mindset in some deal making now?
We're asking our clients, and we're asking the consultants that we work with, what are buying, has COVID or the period we've just gone through delayed or changed the way in which buyers are coming to market? Yes or no? And if so, what's the thinking around how they're buying their services? Has it changed? Is it still going to continue in the traditional manner, or is there something out there that's making people think differently? And we're certainly seeing a few more come our way, and that may be because we've opened the dialogue with Ernst & Young and others who are more involved with relationship contracting opportunities. But I don't know. I think, some of the pipeline that I look at there, it's still transactional based, procurement led, which we've got to look at, but we're trying to influence the way we bid those to bring them further up the slope towards relationship based contracting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Wendy, your thoughts on this?
I can't remember what the question was.
Do you think more people move towards this type of approach, away from that transactional approach of buying and procurement? Because a lot of people think, so say, pandemic is one thing. After post-pandemic, it's all going to change. It's all going to go back to how it was.
I think that relationships as a result of the pandemic have changed. I think there was a huge dependency from clients on their FM suppliers, and I would say suppliers to deliver. And that had to be, to navigate what was very uncertain waters. Nobody had the right answers, nobody knew the solutions, and therefore you had to change the way in which you were working with your supply chain because you were very heavily dependent upon them. I think genuinely that people will hopefully start to look at the fact that actually sort of the traditional sort of, do what I say approach, there is an alternative way to do it. You employ them as experts. You need to be prepared to hear them and to listen to them. And it comes up with a much healthier relationship because you have two equal parties coming through. So I think that the more traditional way of working with the suppliers, I'd like to think has had its day now, and that people will start seeing the real benefits of working alongside in a mutual relationship rather than it being one-sided.
Yeah. And Ardell, going back to Wendy's point earlier about actually because of Zoom, you can get more people into the meeting. Has that helped everyone understanding the process far better and actually that learning?
Yeah, I think it has, definitely. I mean, as Wendy said, you've got a broader cross-section of people involved who would normally be maybe in the background and never get in front of the client. I was going to say, when Wendy was saying that, there's a respectfulness in Zoom dealing as well. People put their hand up and they have their say and it's listened to. And so yeah, definitely we've exposed people to the client organization, the decision-making organization, the problems that we encounter on the journey of negotiating a bid, which they would never see. So I think we've helped with the development of a number of people in doing this, most definitely.
That's
it also
really
helped us further down the organisations. They understood the deal, that you didn't have to have briefing sessions. They knew why. They'd already bought into the relationship with their counterparts. And you have this two-in-a-box situation, and they knew who they were dealing with. And any problems, they'd had a voice at the table. So they automatically, certainly at a site level, they would never have been involved in it normally. They actually already knew what they were getting into and how it was going to work.
Yeah. I think adding to that as well, the structure of the team. So we had a steering committee and a core team, and then support teams feeding in, doing some of the groundwork. The teams, two in a box, rarely, if ever actually, was there an issue escalated to the steerco to opine on. The issues were resolved amongst their groups. You know, we knew they were going on, but and they may have sought some opinion and guidance, but generally the steerco wasn't used as an escalation point, which normally in a normal deal, there's always someone there who's going to decide on whether it's black or white, right or wrong. So I thought that was quite good. That was a good way in which the team interacted to solve their own problems. A good learning process for them.
Was part of this, because it seems like there wasn't very much conflict, which is good, but is that partly because you got the issues out early?
Oh, I think there was. I mean, there was certainly, I wouldn't say there was conflict, there's certainly strong opinion. And the BP team are never shy of giving their opinion. But what it did mean was that it got resolved through the process. So if you think that the fourth rule that you do is the pricing model, so you've already got weeks of preparation that have come through building up into that, and typically that's where the conflict will be, which will be around pricing. And it was remarkably amicable because there'd been so much work done up front, and the cost is the cost. And I think we all would sit there and just go, well, the cost is the cost, and that's what we need to establish is the cost. And a lot of effort went into that, but very little disagreement. And then it was just working out how to incentivize and to do a structure that worked on both sides with our guardrails, so that we had the guardrails that we'd agreed right in the first step. And those came back in time and time again, which was if we weren't meeting those, we'd agreed those, therefore we had to honour those throughout, including in the pricing schedule. So
yeah,
that was, I think, having that upfront agreement around some they were quite tricky. They weren't necessarily straightforward, and it did show in that first couple of weeks with the team where they started to work. And we created Weaver, which was its workplace evolution, as the sort of the joint venture, if you like, not the joint venture in the legal term, but the joint relationship between the organisations, and both parties were really behind that vehicle.
Yeah.
So final question, vested, is it something you believe will grow and grow?
Hope so.
I hope so too. It's almost like a baptism. I think people know of it, but they don't. They have misconceived ideas about what it really is. I think once you've gone through this sort of experience, you can see the benefit of it. So I hope that people do, get involved in vested deals to see the differences that exist, because they're massive. So I hope it grows, I really do. But I think there's an education piece and there's an unlearning piece, which is massive. Wendy alluded to at the beginning, unlearning the behaviors that people have built up over decades and decades, which, coming back to the point of having a wider cross-section of people involved in the bid is only a good thing, because some of the younger talent in our joint organizations can see this way, and hopefully they'll be the advocates of taking this forward, but I really hope so. I'm pushing hard for it. I'm trying to influence people's thinking on going this route, or towards this route. I agree that not everyone will go full vested, but no, I see the merits of it, definitely.
I'd like to think it will grow in terms of popularity. Once you get under the skin of it all, it makes sense. But I would say, come back and ask us in a year how it's gone, or whether or not we're still talking to each other. I'd like to think we are.
That's a good way to finish, isn't it, really? I think we have to do that. Oh, look, can I thank you both? That was a great conversation. I enjoyed it very much. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Wendy.